Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Colliding Worldviews, found only right here on ABN's Trinity channel. As you know, there are a number of weekly shows that are happening Monday through Friday, every single week at the exact same time. And not only that, we do have another marathon coming up in just a couple of weeks. So we want you to please stay tuned and let other people know about ABN and the Trinity channel, because now you can watch it not only through satellite, but also through Apple TV, Amazon Fire Stick TV, Roku, Chromecast Stick, IPTV, Smart TV, and the list continues to grow. So it's a blessing to have you here with us for the Colliding Worldviews, a new show on Mondays from 4:30 to 5:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And once again, we're here with another topic, another guest to inform you about a very vital topic that we need to talk about, because as we know, a modern day Holocaust, which is what many people refer to when it comes to the topic of abortion and killing what is inside the womb of a female before it is born. Now, of course, there are many different viewpoints on what is inside the woman's womb. Is it human? Is it not human? What if it's not human from the get-go, then at what point does it become human? And is it just a glob of cells or tissues, or is it actually a person in there? And if it is a person, then is there value to that life or not? And those questions and much more philosophical questions are what we're going to be talking about today on this episode, because the title of this episode is What Makes Us Human? And again, it is surrounding this topic of abortion and killing, again, what is inside the womb. And who I have here with me to talk about this is Clinton Wilcox. Clinton is a pro-life speaker and writer. He's also a staff apologist with Life Training Institute and a certified speaker and mentor with Justice for All. Clinton specializes in training pro-life people to make the case for life effectively and persuasively. He has been on a number of shows before. So Clinton, welcome back to ABN's Trinity channel. We're having a little problem with the audio. We want to get that fixed, but we have a number of questions to ask you. I want to make sure we can hear you. Clinton, the reason why this is so important, as you know, is because there are a lot of babies who are aborted. And I guess I'm kind of jumping the gun there with the calling them babies, because that's exactly something that we want to talk about while we're here. Do we have your audio fixed now at this point?
Can you hear me?
There we go. Okay, great. Go ahead and welcome to the show. Welcome
you again. Yeah, thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Clinton, the reason why we're doing this show today, the reason why I'm having you on, is because we want to talk about this from a little bit different angle than what people are used to. Usually when you look at this topic in the news, they talk about, okay, what is the unborn, and is it a baby? Is it not a baby? At what point does it become a baby? What part does it become a human? That kind of thing. But usually it's just back and forth. Yes, it's human. No, it's not human. It's just a fetus, or all that kind of stuff. So we can talk about that during the show, but I'm having you on because we're going to be addressing this from a little bit more of a philosophical perspective. And I think that coming at it from this particular angle will actually help people better determine if abortion is right or if it is wrong. And if you're not familiar with these terms, Clinton and I are going to be defining these terms for you to make sure that you understand where we're coming from. And of course, by understanding our terms, when we define them, you will know if this sounds reasonable and if it actually helps you understand this vital issue of abortion, if it is right, if it is wrong. There's obviously a lot of very good pro-life books out there. A lot of people have seen Ray Comfort's 180movie.com, which makes a case for the unborn and why the unborn should not be killed. But Clinton, the first question that I have for you is surrounding the mind-body problem. And can you explain to our audience, number one, what we mean by mind-body problem, and then of course talk about the problem itself?
Well, sure. Essentially, what the mind-body problem is is it's just the problem of how the mind, which is an immaterial entity, is able to interact with the body, which is a physical entity. And that's basically all that's meant by the mind-body problem. Now, a lot of the discussion surrounding the mind body problem has to do with personal identity, and often it can sound pretty obscure, pretty abstract. But the thing is, it's actually a very important discussion because where you come down on the way to resolve the mind body problem will affect how you view certain issues, such as the abortion issue. So even though it's a pretty abstract discussion, it's a very important one to have in your mind. And so the mind body problem is just essentially the problem of how the mind is able to interact with the body. Now, Ed Feser, who's a modern Thomistic philosopher, wrote a book called The Last Superstition, in which he talks about how the mind-body problem was not a problem for the first 15 or 1600 years of modern philosophy, or back even among the ancient Greeks, because they held to a position called hylomorphism, which basically teaches that human beings are irreducible composites of form and matter. That is, the form of the human being. The form is the thing that kind of makes the thing what it is, and so it's because our form interacts with our matter that allows us to flourish as human beings and to be able to perform all of the various capacities that being a human brings with it. All of these things kind of flow from our form. So up until around the Enlightenment period, the mind-body problem wasn't a problem at all. It wasn't until philosophers started rejecting hylomorphism and Aristotelian metaphysics that the mind-body problem actually now became a problem, because now that they were rejecting Aristotelianism, now they had to come up with how best to explain how the mind interacts with the body. And so among modern philosophers, there are a couple of different alternatives to hylomorphism that they defend in order to try and solve this problem. One is called monism, or in other words, physicalism, which is just a human being is just a physical thing, and it's nothing more and nothing less than just a physical thing. Then you have dualism, which teaches that which teaches a couple of different things. You have property dualism, which is where philosophers such as Michael Tooley approach the problem of abortion. And so a property dualist then would state that there's only one type of substance, which is a physical substance, but that substance has two different types of properties: physical properties and mental properties. And the mental properties exist in the brain, essentially. And so they would say that you are essentially your brain. And so once you reach a certain level of being able to think, being able to reason, being self-aware, these kinds of things, then you become a person. You are now identical with yourself. A substance dualist is different. René Descartes was a substance dualist, and he rejected hylomorphism in favor of what we now know as Cartesian dualism, which is essentially that there are two different types of substances. There's the physical substance and there's the mental substance. And the mental substance is separate from the physical substance. It's kind of like when you hear this phrase that we're a ghost in a machine. That's essentially substance dualism, that there's an immaterial substance that is kind of driving the physical substance. And so property dualism and substance dualism are both subject to the mind-body problem, because they're both kind of struggling to explain how exactly the immaterial substance of the mind interacts with the physical substance of the brain. So that's kind of the mind-body problem in a nutshell.
Okay. Now, can you go a little bit more in depth on what property dualism is?
Essentially, essentially, pretty much, property dualism just states that essentially you are your brain, and that your brain, being a physical substance, once it reaches a specific level of organization and complexity, then your mental states kind of emerge from the brain, and these mental substances are not necessarily able to cause anything with the physical, but they are there nonetheless, because you're able to have certain mental experiences such as pain, pleasure, all of these kinds of things. And so if we're going to be talking about the abortion issue, someone like Michael Tooley would say that because there is no soul, like Christians would believe. You're basically just a body which is physical, and your brain, which has these mental properties. So essentially, you do not start to exist until your mental properties are such that you're able to perform a specifically complex uh, until you're specifically developed enough to be able to have these kind of complex mental states. And so someone like Michael Tooley would say that in order for you to be seriously harmed by being killed, you have to be self-aware. And the reason you have to be self-aware is because in order to be seriously harmed of something, you have to have a desire for it. And you cannot have a desire for it until you first see yourself as existing through time and know that, I do not want to cease existing through time. And so you have to be able to recognize yourself as existing through time and have that desire to continue existing in order to be seriously harmed by being deprived of your existence.
Okay, so according to Tooley, if basically being self-aware is what makes us human, does that mean that if he's consistent with that view, that a human being who's in a coma and not personally aware of it would no longer be human, technically?
Yeah, I believe so. It's actually been a little while since I've read Tooley's book, but yeah, I think to be consistent, there's a difference between a reversible coma and an irreversible one. So I'm sure Tooley would say if there's a possibility of you being able to come out of it because you're still kind of psychologically connected to yourself, you still have the right to continue existing. But if it's an irreversible coma, something that there's very little or no chance of you coming out of, then he would consider you already dead, and we should pull the plug on you, essentially.
Okay. Well, that's always why we want to ask people what they mean by something, and we want to be able to, of course, keep them consistent with their view and making sure that they realize the end result of those views as well. Now, how does property dualism pertain to personal identity when we're talking about Clinton, or we're talking about Tony, or we're talking about anyone at all for that matter?
Yeah, so property dualism basically teaches that as soon as you are able to recognize yourself as existing through time or reach a particular point of complexity in your mental states, then you are a person. And so Michael Tooley would say that, for example, when you fall asleep, some people will say, well, if your consciousness is what's necessary to grant your personhood, when you fall asleep, does that mean that you cease to be a person? And Michael Tooley would say, well, no, you wouldn't cease to be a person, because you're still the person who dozes off and falls asleep, and the person who wakes up again from being asleep is the same person, because there's that psychological connectedness from the person before they fall asleep and after they fall asleep. And so to someone like Tooley, it would be the psychological connectedness that grounds your identity as a person. And that's why you continue being a person even when you cease being presently conscious.
And how does the property dualism that you've been describing, how does that differ from the Christian view of personhood, when you and I as Christians look at the people around us and say, okay, these are people who are made in the image of God? How is our view, I should say, differently than the property dualism?
Yeah, essentially, property dualism and substance dualism differs in basically what you consider the immaterial factor to be. A property dualist would say the immaterial factor of a human being is not a substance in itself, it's merely a property of the brain. And so you have a material property of the brain, and you have an immaterial property, which are the thoughts and experiences that a person goes through. A substance dualist would say that the immaterial part of us is a separate substance, a separate thing. And depending on whether you're a Cartesian dualist or hylomorphist, you would really determine what you think this immaterial thing is. And so a Cartesian dualist would say that the immaterial aspect, the mind, is separate from the body, and it's the mind that that controls the body. And for example, when you have memories, just an example, it's similar for the other brain states as well. But for example, when you store a memory, you're not technically storing a memory in the brain, even though there is a connection between the brain and the immaterial part of you. Whereas, for example, if you suffer a blow to a certain part of your brain, you might lose those memories. But to the substance dualist, the memories are not actually stored in the brain; they're stored in the mind, and it's the mind that recalls them, even though it's connected to the brain. And there are certain physical things that happen when you're recalling memories. And so that's the main difference, is that the Cartesian dualist would believe that the separate substance of the immaterial portion of the human being is something that's kind of equal to the body and something that's separate to the body. And if you're a Christian, obviously you believe that immaterial thing would be the soul, which once the body dies, the soul then is able to exist consciously outside the body in some disembodied state in heaven until Jesus returns, and the final resurrection then would reunite us with our body. So that's really the main difference. So atheists are more likely to hold the property dualist position, even though I have heard of some Christians holding that position as well. But Christians are more likely to hold the substance dualist position, whether of the Cartesian variety or the hylomorphic variety. And
Okay.
so the Christian then, who holds to substance dualism, would actually present a couple of reasons why we should not, or why property dualism doesn't work to ground the personhood or existence of the immaterial portion of us, and why that doesn't account for our personal identity. And one of the things, this is actually one of the arguments that William Lane Craig and J.P. Moreland present in their book Philosophical Foundations for a Christian Worldview. They would say that property dualism is self-refuting because property dualism assumes determinism, and assuming determinism then is self-refuting, because if determinism is true, then it undercuts any reason at all that we have for rationality itself. Because if the only reason that I believe something is because I am causally determined to believe it, well, then there is absolutely no reason to believe that what I believe is true. I only believe it because I've been causally determined to believe it. And then the other sort of argument that we can present against property dualism is the position that human beings have kind of the center of identity, center of consciousness, and that center of consciousness pervades through time. So the substance dualist and hylomorphist would hold the position that the human being exists through time, and that each of the particular points in time in which a human being exists, that human being is the same individual through all points of that time. But if property dualism was true, if a person is just basically their body and or their brain, then anytime anything changes in that human being, that the human being then would be a completely different person than they were before. And so for example, if we look at justice, then if we were to hold to property dualism, we would have to say then that justice is unjust, because the person who commits the crime, the person who is captured for the crime, the person who's put on trial, and the person who goes to jail are all completely different people. And so in order for justice to be just, we would have to hold the same person who committed the crime accountable for the crime. So property dualism then leads to certain absurdities, such as that we would have to do away with our justice system, because it's not just to hold someone accountable if they're a completely different person than they were before.
So a non-philosophical way of talking about this, just to clear it up for our viewers, make sure we're all on the same page, is that the property dualist would fall under, say, the atheism category, where they believe that as soon as you were aware of your surroundings and self-conscious, then basically that was the beginning of your existence. And then
Right.
when you die, whatever, however many days or years down the road that is, as soon as you are no longer self-aware because the body has been killed, and of course the brain can no longer survive without that blood flow and heartbeat and all that stuff, basically the person ceases to exist, and they don't even know that they're dead. I mean, there's just really no awareness whatsoever, and basically there'd be no heaven or no hell or anywhere else for that matter for that soul to go to, correct?
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you're a Christian who happens to hold to property dualism, then you would believe that there's a heaven. You would just kind of believe that once we die, we just cease to be conscious, and then at the end, when Christ resurrects us, then you would be conscious again because Christ is resurrected in the body. So if there's a Christian who holds to the property dualism, then considering that there's a final resurrection at the end, when Jesus returns, then that's a reason you would have for believing that we would live again, is because you're a Christian specifically. But if you're an atheist who holds to that, then yeah, as atheists will tell you, once you die, and that's it. So if you are just your body and your brain and nothing else, then your existence ceases once you die, and your brain stops being able to function because of the loss of blood flow and consciousness and all that.
So I guess a Christian who holds to some kind of soul sleep, or that this intermediate state between dying and then the resurrection, if they say, I don't believe that the person goes to paradise or to heaven, I guess they could probably be perhaps a property dualist, believing in a soul sleep between the point of death and resurrection.
Yeah, they could. Potentially. I don't think that's a position that we should hold as Christians, but
Yeah.
I have heard of some Christians who do believe that way. But I think there are good reasons for believing that we do have a soul, or that some kind of immaterial aspect to us that does survive on into death and then is reunited with the body once the final resurrection occurs.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, we do obviously want to combine this philosophical reasoning with Scripture itself. And when the Bible
Right.
says to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord, then we have to take that into account. And that, of course, doesn't mean that this hylomorphism isn't true. It just means that we can know what happens when we die, if there is a soul sleep state, or if not, which it doesn't sound like there is, and also that property dualism does not sound correct, obviously, if we actually are with the Lord after we die and our physical body goes in the ground, but we're with the Lord, then this hylomorphic view that you're talking about definitely does sound more precise and actually what is real and actual. Now, Clinton, when you say Cartesian, you are referring, for our viewers, you are referring to Rene Descartes, correct?
Correct. Yeah, Descartes, I think, was an 18th century philosopher who rejected Aristotelianism out of hand. He didn't believe in hylomorphism. He actually believed, he still believed in dualism, but he formulated what we now refer to as Cartesian dualism, and I'm not sure if a philosopher would refer to it in this way, but it seems to me to be a little bit at least commonsensical. If you don't read any of the hylomorphist thinkers and you're just a regular Christian, I think this might be the common sense kind of view that you're an ensouled physical body, who the two are separate. Although both are important, it's not to be confused with Gnosticism, to where the physical body is evil and we need to escape the confines of the physical prison. But it's kind of this view. We see it a lot in like movies too, where like someone dies and the disembodied spirit remains around and has to like complete something so that the body can rest and the spirit can move on or something. And so I think the Cartesian dualism might be kind of the commonsensical view, to where someone who hasn't really read any of the hylomorphist thinkers might think, yeah, that sounds about right. That kind of matches with my intuitions. But I think that hylomorphism, if you really read into it and do the study, the reason that I consider myself a hylomorphist is because even though it's a bit more complicated than Cartesian dualism, it seems to make the best sense out of our intuitions when you really start to boil it down. It makes better sense of how we talk about things, and it makes better sense of things that the medical profession talks about, such as why, for example, if the liver stops functioning properly, I think hylomorphism makes the best sense out of why we can say the liver is malfunctioning, and how we can know how we can restore function to the liver through medical advancements or the like.
Yeah, I see. When I look to Scripture, I see what we are describing as hylomorphism, which seems to be accurate. I mean, we see when God created Adam and the body was there, but then we read that God breathed into his body the breath of life, and he
Hmm.
became a living soul. So it definitely sounds like this philosophical
Hmm.
view of you have a form, which is the human body, right? You have the man form, and then you have the matter, and matter not referring to material like DNA or cells and all that stuff, but when Clinton is saying matter and form being kind of the nature of what something is, and then matter being the individuation of that form. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much on the right track, because we don't want to understand form as what something looks like, because obviously a
Mhm.
human being doesn't look the same throughout all parts of their life. We begin
Yeah.
life as a single-celled zygote, and then that cell starts to divide and keeps dividing, and then eventually we start to take on more recognizable features of later human beings, older human beings. And so we don't want to understand form as what something looks like, even though there is a sense in which some things we can understand the form. For example, if you're looking at a blue rubber ball, well, the form of the blue rubber ball is a round object, and so in
Mhm.
that case, it does take on the form of a ball is what it looks like. But the form of a living thing is a little bit different, because it goes through different shapes throughout its lifetime. And so yeah, so we really don't want to understand form as just what something looks like. It's more like kind of the underlying thing that makes something what it is,
Kind
and
of
kind of
the
directs its
essence of a thing, right?
right. Yeah, the essence of a thing, what grounds its ultimate capacities, and in the for the I'm blanking on the word here. In the context of a human being, it grounds our ultimate capacities for rational thought, our ultimate capacities for speech, our ultimate capacities for being able to walk, and all of these different things. So yeah, so the form of a human being, as we would say, is a rational animal.
So you and I have the same form, but we have different matter because we're different people,
Right, and
right?
yeah, and each of us kind of develop different things, because obviously there are different things that are developed by our DNA, which we get from our parents. And so, I myself am a human being. My black friend is a human being. My Asian friend is a human being. We're all human beings, but because we all have different DNA, different things that our DNA can express, we all have these accidental features. Accidental meaning not essential to us as human beings. We all have these different accidental features, but we're all equal because we all have the form of human, and so we all deserve equal treatment as human beings. And that's incidentally why the unborn deserve equal treatment from fertilization, because once the sperm meets the egg, a new human organism is brought into existence, and that human organism has a human nature. It has the form of humanity, and because it has a form of humanity, it will develop along the path of human development, because its nature determines all of its various capacities.
Okay, well, Clinton, you're giving our audience a whole lot to think about. We do have to take a short break, but we come back, we're going to get into what are some of the arguments for substance dualism and other questions that I have for Clinton as well. So please stay right where you are. As you can tell, we're having a little bit of a philosophical discussion today compared to most weeks. But again, a very vital topic, a very vital subject of abortion. Is it right or is it wrong? And how can we know philosophically if it is right or wrong? Because this goes into your toolbox as a Christian when you are talking with people and explaining why you believe that abortion is wrong, and that is the case. So we'll be back in just a couple of minutes for more Colliding Worldviews.
ABN and Trinity Channel is excited to announce the ABN Digital Tree, which is a new project that the ABN ministry will bring to you within 4 stages of development. Get ready for the launching and celebration of Stage 1 of the Digital Tree on March 13th. We have watered the mustard seed and are excited to watch this project grow into a big tree that will provide to you new channels as we spread onto new platforms. With the help of God, ABN and Trinity Channel will multiply itself in multi-directions in order to reach more people throughout the world and to spread His word. For more information, please call the numbers at your screen or visit our website at trinitychannel.com.
ABN viewers, to watch free reruns of our marathon shows, apologetic shows, and English programs, go to www.youtube.com and type Trinity Channel. Here at ABN, we make it easier for viewers like you to watch programs. For more information, call us at 248-416-1300.
ABN and Trinity Channel is increasing exponentially both in the number of apologists and the quality of the shows, in terms of the debates and the launching of the new shows that involve politics, Islam, science and creation, prayer, and world religions and heresies. We need your help in supporting this unique channel. The only way for ABN and Trinity Channel to continue our mission in spreading the Word of God and exposing false religions globally and internationally is with your help and support. To send your support and donations, please call the numbers at your screen or visit our website at trinitychannel.com.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to Colliding Worldviews. Again, today we're having a little bit of a philosophical discussion with my guest, Clinton Wilcox, who is a pro-life speaker and writer. He's also a staff apologist with Life Training Institute and a certified speaker and mentor with Justice for All. Now, today we are talking about the topic of abortion, and is it right or is it wrong? And again, we aren't just coming at it from the usual angle that people come from, as far as, yes, it is okay, or no, it is wrong because of this or because of my personal opinion or any of that stuff. We're actually getting down to what undergirds our theology, and that is philosophy itself, and talking about ontology, the existence of things, and what makes us human, what makes us what we are. We talked about before the break about property dualism, usually the view that many atheists have, because they believe that your mind and when your body dies and your mind ceases to exist, then you exist no longer. They believe in just pure materialism, which means if your brain is not working, then your mind is not either, because you are not a soul that is combined with a body or inside of a body or anything like that, however you want to describe it. But we started talking about hylomorphism, which I think is really cool, and Clinton does too, because we think that that is the better way of describing the nature of humans and what we are. Of course, who we are is different. Clinton is a person. I am a person. But when you ask, okay, what is Clinton? What is Tony? We're going to say human. So what entails being human? And Clinton, before we get even deeper into the discussion, I want to ask you, what are some of the arguments for substance dualism, which is, of course, in opposition to that property dualism, which we talked about earlier?
Right. So I have a couple of arguments in support of substance dualism. The first one, again, comes from Moreland and Craig's book. And the first argument is that we have a basic awareness of ourself, that we're aware of our own self as being distinct from our bodies in any particular mental experience that we have. So, there's a law in philosophy that states that if any two things are identical, then they'll have all properties in common. And so if there's anything different, so as an argument goes, if there's anything that, for example, my awareness of self has, or that I have, that my body does not have, then I am not the same thing as my body, because there is at least one property that we don't have in common. One of those would be that this is an argument I've heard from J.P. Moreland, that I am potentially disembodiable. I can conceive of myself being disembodied. I have reason to believe, because I believe Christianity is true, that there will be a time when I'll be disembodiable. But my body is not disembodiable. If it was, that would be a contradiction in terms, because obviously the body itself cannot be disembodiable. So there's at least one property that I have that my body does not. So I am not the same thing as my body. And so Moreland and Craig in their book list a few things that kind of flow from this idea that we have a basic awareness of ourself, that number one, we're aware that we have an immaterial center of consciousness and volition just being a fancy word meaning that we have a will, that we use our body as an instrument to interact with the world. Number two, that we are the owner of our experiences and not identical to them. And number three, that we are an enduring self that exists as the same possessor of our experiences through time. And so all of those arguments that Craig and Moreland are putting forth is just kind of to show that I am aware of myself as something that exists separately from my body and something that exists separately from my mental states. And so that's an argument that they present. But another argument for substance dualism kind of touches back on the argument that I gave before, that we are an enduring self that persists through time. Now, if you were just identical to your body, or if you were just identical to your brain or your mental states, then every time your body changes, or every time you gain a new mental state, you would become a brand new person, because your body then would be different. So if you were identical to your body, then whenever your body changes, no matter how small the change is, you would change as well. You would become a brand new person. So the fact that we persist through time is evidence for substance dualism, because there's an underlying center of consciousness then that persists through time and through all of our changes. And so, for example, I could lose an arm in an industrial accident, but I would still remain the same person. When I came into existence at fertilization, I started as a single-celled zygote, but I went through numerous changes. My one cell divided into two, which divided into 4, into 8, into 16, et cetera, et cetera. So I became bigger. I got more skin cells. I became more developed. I eventually changed location from being in the womb to being outside the womb, and I became less developed as time went on. All of these changes, though, were within my internal programming to undergo, and so I remained the same individual through all of these changes. But even so, even a change that's not within my internal programming, as long as that change doesn't specifically kill me, such as, for example, losing an arm in an industrial accident, I will remain the same individual through time. And the fact that I do remain the same individual through time is evidence then for substance dualism as opposed to property dualism.
Okay, and something I want to ask you about. I don't
Sure.
know if property dualists would agree with this, or if you say, well, no, this, what I'm about to say would actually back up the substance dualism, or perhaps the hylomorphism in particular. But the fact that you and I could have mental stress that actually affects our physical body, and we know that our brain is physical, but our mind is not. But if we actually have mental, immaterial, non-physical thoughts that affect our physical body, and then the fact that I can take a physical pill that you can feel, and it's obviously not me, but it's material. I could take a pill that all of a sudden affects me mentally as well. Do you think that is something that property dualists can say, well, yeah, that backs up our view? Or do you think that backs up the substance dualism and perhaps the hylomorphism in particular?
Yeah, I think that kind of thing would be consistent with all three, because a property dualist would say that all of our mental experiences are grounded in our brain, that there's a physical explanation for why we have these conscious experiences. And so they would say then that taking a pill to kind of fix your psychology, your brain, would then affect your mental states. And so I think that could be consistent with the property dualist view, as well as with the substance and hylomorphic view as well.
Okay. So how do property dualists view the topic of abortion?
Well, obviously, there are a lot of different arguments for abortion. So yeah, it really just depends on what. Basically, it depends on the individual philosopher, him or herself, and what property they take to be the one that grounds our value as persons. In the case of Michael Tooley, it's that we have to be sufficiently self-aware to be able to see ourselves as existing through time, and then you could be seriously harmed by being deprived of your life because you now value your life because you're seeing yourself as existing through time. Another philosopher like David Boonin would say that, well, you don't have to be self-aware, but you have to have your cortical brain activity has to be going on in your brain, and that happens somewhere around 24 to 26 weeks, I think. So he would say that that the reason that you're harmed by being deprived of something is because you have to desire it. If you don't desire something, then you're not being harmed by being deprived of it. But he says you don't have to presently desire the thing. Instead, he makes a few distinctions between types of desires, to where his basic argument is that that if you are in a position to where you would have desired it had you been aware of all the information, then we can say that that you would be harmed by being deprived of something that you would have desired if you were in a position to desire it. And Boonen's position is that you don't actually start having the rudimentary grounding for desires until cortical brain activity starts firing. So David Boonen, you're not someone that we should protect until sometime around 26 weeks or even later in that case. So it really depends on the particular philosopher and what particular property they view is the one that grounds our value as a person. And so this is kind of another reason why property dualism then doesn't succeed as a viewpoint, and that's because it grounds our personhood and our personal identity in the functions that we can perform. But the problem is that these functions that we can perform are themselves properties of persons. For example, consciousness is not something that just kind of floats around, assuming you're not like a Platonist who believes in the realm of forms. Consciousness is not this thing that we can like reach out and touch, put it on a shelf, those kinds of things. Consciousness is a property that inheres in a person. And so to say that a person is someone who can be conscious or who can be self-aware is really to put the cart before the horse, because as the hylomorphic would say, your form precedes your function. Just as you have to exist as a human being before you can develop all of your human parts, you have to exist as a person before you can develop all of your personal properties. Because things like consciousness, self-awareness, etc., these things come about just through time, through the development of the human being. So this weighs in favor of hylomorphism, not property dualism, because you have to first exist before you can then start exhibiting these properties.
So is property dualism compatible or incompatible with Christianity?
Again, it depends on who you ask. I would say, I don't want to say strictly that it's incompatible just because I do know there are some Christian property dualists, but I don't think it's a position Christians ought to hold. I think Christians should be substance dualists. Just because I think the Bible does clearly teach that we do have an immaterial soul, and so if you don't believe we have an immaterial soul, then I think your view is in conflict with Scripture. So I hesitate to say it's not compatible because the Christian property dualists that I know, but I just think it's not a position that Christians ought to be holding, essentially.
So when you're at work, walking down the street, at the library, wherever, and you start a conversation with people about this, or say if you were outside a abortion clinic and you started talking with a young lady who was contemplating having an abortion, and you guys started talking and she was getting really interested in what you had to say, and it sounded to you like she was a property dualist. Let's just say you had a philosophical conversation outside there. How would you respond to her if she was coming at you with that property dualist mentality?
Yeah, no, I don't necessarily go to a lot of abortion clinics to have conversations, because the conversations that you have with people outside of abortion clinics are usually pretty different from the conversations you would have with people on, say, a college campus. I do a lot of outreach at college campuses. I do some at abortion clinics, but it's not really my forte to have the discussions there, because I'm more philosophically minded, whereas outside an abortion clinic you need someone who's more of a counselor kind of person. But the thing about this is that unless they've really studied philosophical positions or thinkers like Tooley or Peter Singer or Boonen or Jeff McMahon or any of the other abortion choice thinkers, they're probably not going to recognize that they hold these positions. And especially if they're not religious, they might have a physicalist or property dualist view just by virtue of their atheism. And so they might not actually know that that's the kind of position that they hold. And so if I was talking to somebody who I think doesn't really like understand the philosophical underpinnings of their view, then I wouldn't go, full on philosopher mode on them. I would go in more of an information gathering mode with them. I would just ask them questions about their particular view and why they hold those kinds of things. Greg Koukl wrote a book called Tactics, in which he talks about these Columbo questions that you can ask, which are geared toward gathering information, but are also kind of geared towards steering the conversation in the direction that you want it to go. So you can ask questions, such as, so what's your view? What do you mean when you say this? And you gather information, and then once you learn their view, you can start pressing with other questions that kind of get at the root of what they believe. So you believe this. So have you ever considered the possibility that if you believe this, then you should also believe this? So, for example, if they believe that you're not really a person, someone that we should protect in law until you're self-aware, I would ask them, thinking they might not have had the opportunities to read these philosophical books, I might ask, okay, so you believe that you're not really a person until you're self-aware, until you can think and reason, those kinds of things. Well, have you ever considered then that infants, just someone 5 or 10 minutes after they're born, they're not capable of reasoning or of engaging in higher thought or of any of these things that they're trying to ground personhood in. And so I would ask, so have you ever considered then that your view would lead to the legalization of infanticide? And most people you encounter will not be very comfortable with supporting infanticide. And so just kind of asking them those Columbo questions will then kind of help them to realize for themselves what positions their view leads to. And that can be pretty effective. And that you're not actually telling them what to believe. You're actually helping them see for themselves what they believe and causing them to rethink it.
Excellent. Yeah, and that is a great book. If our viewers do not know what you're referring to, that is Greg Koukl. That's Koukl, and the book is called Tactics. And like Clinton said, it's a great tool for you to use when you're in conversations with people, because like you said, it talks to you about the Columbo tactic, the suicide tactic, the taking the roof off tactic, all these different cool names that Greg Koukl gives to them. But it really teaches you how to stay in control of a conversation and maneuver in conversations, especially when you're engaging with someone who is giving you a lot of information, and you can take that information and create it into another form of a question. If they say, oh, I don't believe this, I don't believe that, not necessarily saying this and that, but whatever they happen to say, using that in forming a new question to continually gain information. And by gaining information, you don't have to assume. You can just be learning about the person, what they believe, why they believe it. And again, it just is really a very practical book, practical tool in our conversations that we have with people when we are trying to find out what people believe and why. And as I will tell you, and Clinton will tell you too, a lot of people believe certain things, but when you ask them, why do you believe that? They say, well, I don't know, or well, that's just what I like. I mean, you can tell they haven't really thought deep about it. And
I think the reason that they do that is because they kind of have this intuition, like someone who just like really strongly believes that abortion should be legal and that there's nothing wrong with it, but they haven't really thought much about why they believe that. And so when you kind of put them on the spot like that, they try to come up with any sort of reason to justify their intuitions. And so it really does take a lot of patience and just trying to work through their ideas. And because when you talk to somebody, you might be talking to them, and they might be kind of thinking through their own views for the first time ever. So it does take a bit of patience when you're having these conversations also.
And asking them those questions basically it forces them to think about it, because lots of times people hear something and then without doing any research on their own, they just repeat it. That all of a sudden, especially if it's a friend or a family member, they believe this. Okay, well, I guess I'll believe that too, because I know them, I care about them, I care about what they think, so I'll go ahead and hold that same view. But I mean, that is how a lot of man-made religions continue to live on, is because certain viewpoints are passed on to children and grandchildren, and there is no research done. And when people do their research, they find out that scientific evidence, historical evidence, archaeological evidence, etc., back up the Christian worldview and not the different man-made religions that are out there, like Islam and Mormonism and Jehovah's Witnesses and Hinduism and so on. So Clinton, what are some ways, or what is some of the lingo that you do use when you are talking with people? As you know, a lot of people out there, whether they are for abortion or not, a lot of people don't read a lot of books in general, let alone philosophy books talking about this specific stuff. So what are some of the terms that you use? Because I know you don't just walk up to people and start talking about property dualism and substance dualism and all of that.
Right.
But for the people out there who have, everyday conversations with coworkers or family members or neighbors, what are some terms that you would use in place of what we've been talking about today? Some tools that you can give people that they can use when they get in these conversations.
Yeah. Well, yeah, when you're talking to someone, especially when you're talking to a complete stranger who doesn't know you, you don't want to just start dropping all these big philosophical terms, because it can often come across, even if you don't intend it like this, it can often come across as snooty and like you're trying to make yourself better than that person by using all of these big philosophical words that are difficult for people to recognize. So it can kind of come across like you're trying to, to kind of beat them over the head with your knowledge and make them feel inferior because of that. And so that's definitely something that you want to avoid, especially if you want to be persuasive. So regarding the terminology, there really aren't very many alternative words that I use. I just kind of take the time to explain the concepts in a way that they can understand, and that often means using analogies that kind of illustrate the point that I'm making. And so when I talk about, for example, the concept of substance, there's a difference between a substance, regarding how it develops. All living things are substances essentially, and a substance is just an entity that maintains its identity through change. So all living things are substances. We begin life as a single-cell zygote, in the sexually reproductive species, and then we develop in the womb, and we develop because we have this internal nature that guides our development. Artifacts are something different. Artifacts are like a car, and they don't develop like human beings do. They are actually constructed piece by piece, and because of that, they're not what they are. They're not cars. When you first put the first two pieces of metal together, they're not a car until you've actually constructed it and is able to perform the function that it was meant to perform. So it's not a car unless you can actually drive off the lot and transport people and items from place to place. And so this can be kind of a heavy philosophical subject. And so when I want to break it down to somebody, there are a couple of illustrations that we can use. In fact, the car on the assembly line is one way that we illustrate how artifacts, or if you want to use a different term than artifact, you could just use an artificially constructed thing, or like an artificial thing, or something like that, to break it down a little bit. And so the car on the assembly line kind of illustrates how these artifacts are constructed, that they're constructed piece by piece. They're constructed by an outside builder. Just left alone, the hunk of metal that the artifact comes from will not become a car on its own. It requires an outside builder to construct it. And so human development is different because we are substances. And so if we want to illustrate how a substance develops, we can use what Richard Stith, a pro-life philosopher, uses. And he talks about a Polaroid picture. And so a Polaroid picture, you take the Polaroid camera, you snap the camera itself, and a little piece of plastic comes out the chute, and it starts as a little brownish gray smudge, and then you kind of have to wait for a few minutes for it to develop. And after you wait, it will develop into the picture. But if somebody rips it up when it's still a little brownish gray smudge and then throws it away in the trash, well, they've still destroyed your picture. The picture was there, it just didn't have time to develop yet. And so that's an illustration of how substances are. The substance is what it is at the very beginning. It just needs time, proper nutrition, proper environment, a lack of fatal threats, and a proper environment in order to develop. And so it will, like that Polaroid picture, everything that it is and will develop into is present right from the very beginning. We just didn't have the means to see it and to tell what it is. So so when I talk about these philosophical concepts, it's not necessarily about finding alternative terms, although that can be the case at times. Often what it boils down to is just finding a good analogy that will help illustrate the point that we're trying to make, and using more simplified language as opposed to using these big philosophical terms. So just in summary, I would say if an alternative word doesn't work, just use simplified language and use analogies that help illustrate your point. And that's how I would usually talk to someone about these concepts.
Excellent. Well, I know you've given our audience a whole lot to think about. And like we said, this hylomorphic view that you talked about is what we seem to find in the Bible when it talks about man becoming a living soul. Then think about even the Lord Jesus Christ himself. After he died on the cross and then rose from the dead 3 days later, he didn't just have a physical spirit, like as if that physical body was a bad thing and it was a good thing that it died because he didn't need it anymore. He actually rose in a physical body and then ascended to heaven. And the Bible tells us that we will have a resurrected body as well, that we are actually not complete unless we have that soul indwelled body that you see in front of you, at least two people right now, with myself and Clinton, that we will have resurrected bodies someday. Clinton, 10 seconds, what we'd like to tell our viewers in your closing statement.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've pretty much said everything that I wanted to say. I guess I could just basically summarize in that, substance dualism I feel is superior over property dualism because it best explains why there's that continuing underlying principle of consciousness that remains the same through time. Because if you're just identical to your body or to your mind, every time your body or your mind changes, you become a brand new person, which doesn't fit in with our intuitions, and it doesn't fit in with why our justice system is the way it is. Because in order to be just, we must put into prison the same person who committed the crime, which wouldn't be possible under property dualism. And hylomorphism, I think, is a better alternative than substance dualism, just because it makes better sense of the world itself, of how we think about the world, and how we talk about certain things, especially in like the medical field and certain things. So that's just kind of a little basic summary of everything I've talked about.
Great. Well, thank you for being on, Clinton. And viewers, if you want to see a couple of more shows that Clinton Wilcox has been on, if you go to the Trinity Channel's YouTube channel, you'll find a show from April of 2016. It's called The Case for Life, Inside and Outside the Womb. Also in September of 2016, there was a show called Life, What Makes Humans So Special? And you can find Clinton on both of those, as well as a couple of more guests, because as you know, during our marathon shows, we have multiple guests. And that'll be the same case in just a couple of weeks, because the International Apologetics Marathon, the first one of 2017, is coming up very soon. So please let your friends know. Allow them to find Trinity Channel by giving them the link to the Trinity Channel's website, or we have the Apple TV, the Amazon Fire Stick, the Roku, the Chromecast, the IPTV, Smart TV, and it continues to grow. And just next week, we're going to be having new announcements about new platforms and all of that. And we're really upping the game at ABN, the Trinity Channel, with a new high quality that you've already seen, but we're getting even higher quality very soon. So it's a blessing to have you here. Please continue to support ABN and the Trinity Channel. Again, make a monthly pledge or a one-time gift. Just easy to sign up with debit card or credit card, and you can support ABN on an ongoing basis, which will allow these shows to continue, allow us to expand to more platforms, allow us to up the quality to high definition video and sound, and it's just going to be a greater and greater blessing to everyone out there who's able to watch the shows, listen to the shows, watch the debates, watch the International Apologetics Marathons as they continue. So thank you for being with us once again on Colliding Worldviews. We'll be back next Monday with more Colliding Worldviews and another great guest, if not more than one guest. So please stay tuned right here on ABN Trinity Channel. God bless you and good night.